My name is Taking Pock. I'm with the City of Sydney here as a cultural producer. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Idea Space, Darling Square Library. I'd like to begin today's event by first acknowledging that we are on the lands of the traditional custodians, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. I'd like to acknowledge elders past and present, and also respect and acknowledge their continuing culture and contribution that they make to the life of this city, Sydney and our region. For those at home who might like to type into the chat the name of the country you're joining us from, the toolbar at the bottom of your screen. Just a bit of housekeeping, particularly for those at home on Zoom. This is how the talk will flow today. We are, first of all, recording today's talk, and we believe that Sydney University might have access to these videos later down the track, but you'll be notified when that is available. The best way to view the talk is to choose Fit to Window from the View options drop-down at the top of your screen. We will have a moderated questions session at the end of the talk. Please put your questions in the chat or the Q&A section at any time, and one of us will pass the question on to the speaker. If you are having any technical difficulties, also post that in the chat. And at the end of the talk, we'll be posting up a short survey through a QR code on the screen here and also on your Zoom screen, where we seek your feedback on our events and any ideas you might have to help us improve. Now, I'd like to also introduce our speaker for today. As you all know, that this is an event that the city has in partnership with the Brain and Mind Institute at Sydney University. This is the second in the series on sleep, the body clock, and mental health. I'd like to welcome Dr. Joanne Carpenter, a postdoctoral research fellow at the Brain and Mind Centre, and research focuses on uncovering the neurobiological basis of sleep-wake disturbance in mood disorders and helping us understand impacts on treatment response, as well as other outcomes. Dr. Carpenter hopes the research will contribute to an increased understanding of how mood disorders develop and lead to improvements in optimal treatments and in early intervention. Now, let's hear from Dr. Carpenter herself. Please welcome Dr. Joanne Carpenter.
Thank you. So I'm Dr. Joanne Carpenter from the Brain and Mind Centre at the University of Sydney, where my team and I conduct research into the body clock and its role in mental health and mental illness. And I'm here with you today to share an understanding of what the body clock is, what it does, and why you should care about it. And then to share some insights from research into how a disrupted body clock may play a role in the development and the persistence of mood disorders in some people. And then to think, what can we do about that? How can we correct this body clock dysfunction to improve outcomes for people with mood disorders? And in an ideal world, prevent those disorders from occurring in the first place. So to start off with, what is the body clock? So the body clock is a system that we all have inside ourselves that helps our body to know what time of day to do different things. So we live in a planet whose rotation in relation to the sun has created a 24-hour cycle of lightness and darkness. The body clock has evolved under those conditions to make sure that we are doing the right things at the right time of day, and we're optimizing the way that we function in this 24-hour light-dark cycle. I'll talk a little bit today about circadian rhythms. So what a circadian rhythm is just a 24-hour pattern in something that is produced as a result of the body clock. So the body clock produces these 24-hour circadian rhythms. Some of the earliest research into the body clock and circadian rhythms was done by a French researcher in the 18th century who observed a plant that closed its leaves at night time and opened its leaves during the day. They then put that plant inside a dark box and observed that the plant continued to open and close its leaves at roughly the same time of day, despite the fact that it had no light or any other signals from the external environment to let it know what time of day it was. So what this showed was that the plant had an internal timekeeping system that was letting it know what time of day to open and close those leaves, even when there was nothing from the environment to tell it what time of day it was. From here, these circadian rhythms and 24-hour patterns were discovered in other plants and in animals, and it turns out that they exist in pretty much all living organisms. Some other early research into circadian rhythms was conducted in honeybees. And so what they did was they observed the foraging behaviour of honeybees, and honeybees were most active at the times of day when it was most optimal for them to get the pollen and the nectar. They then took these bees elsewhere in the world, so packed them up in a box and took them on a little bee holiday. And when they got there, they discovered that the bees continued the foraging behaviour at the same time of day as they had in the original location. So basically the bees had jet lag. They got to this new location and they were continuing to run on the schedule of the previous location because of that internal clock still continuing to run. So now we get to humans. So in humans and in other mammals, the clock is a lot more complicated. We actually have a master clock in our brain, in a little part of the brain called the suprachiasmatic nucleus, or we call it the SCN for short. That's in a part of the brain called the hypothalamus. And this master clock in the SCN has the very important job of coordinating 24-hour rhythms in all aspects of different body and behaviour processes. When we remove the SCN, when it's not present in rodents, they find that these rodents will sleep and eat and be active at completely chaotic times of day with no sense of order or rhythm. And as you can imagine, that would make it very difficult living in the natural world for them to have access to food and to stay away from predators, and for humans as well. It is really important for us to be able to be coordinated with our environment, for us to have circadian rhythms and a well-functioning body clock. So this body clock controls everything that we do around the clock. And when I say everything, I mean just about everything. So the body clock controls what time of day we're most likely to fall asleep and to be awake. It also controls our cognition and our thinking and what time of day we are at our peak. It controls what time of day we exercise most effectively. It controls a whole range of different digestive processes and what time of day our appetite peaks. And then it also has a role in things like immunity and how we respond to infection. And so you can find a way that the body clock influences just about everything that we do. Another really important part of what the body clock does is adapting to the environment that we're in. So you might wonder what would happen if you lived in an environment where you didn't know what time of day it was and you were just running on your own schedule. So lucky for you, some researchers have actually tested this. What they did was they basically put themselves inside a cave where there was no daylight, no clocks, no way for them to tell what time of day it was at all, and they stayed there for an extended period of time. And what they found,
Sorry, so I'm just fixing up. Let's go with that. Just a slight sound. All right.
That's okay. Apologies, fixing the technical difficulties. So these researchers that were in the caves for an extended period of time discovered that their body clocks ran on their own rhythm, but they actually ran on a schedule that was slightly longer than 24 hours. So we have this internal clock that runs on its own schedule of slightly longer than 24 hours. And then under normal conditions, the clock adjusts itself every day to fit with the precise 24-hour day that we are actually living in. And there are a couple of key signals from the environment that the body clock gets so that it knows how and when to adjust itself. These include things like the temperature, so it's warmer during the day and colder at night. The behaviours that we do, so our eating cues and our social cues and what time of day we do those. But by and large, the most important signal to our clock to help it know what time of day it is light, whether that's sunlight or light coming from non-natural sources. And researchers have actually found cells in the retina at the back of the eye whose primary role is to convey light information to this master clock. These different signals, we call them Zeitgebers, which is a German word for time giver, and they are just signals to tell the clock what time of day it is and to help it adjust. There are a couple of key outputs from the body clock that we measure in our research to help us know what's happening with the body clock and how it's functioning. These include sleep and wake time, so what time is someone going to bed, what time are they falling asleep, what time are they waking up, but also how does that change from day to day, how regular is that? We then also look at activity patterns, and we're looking at activity around the whole 24-hour day, not just at night or during the day. And from this, we look at what time of day is somebody most active, what time are they least active, and that's looking at not just physical exercise, but also just everyday movement. One of the devices that helps us to measure this is an actigraphy watch, so a device a bit like a Fitbit or another sort of fitness watch that measures movement, and you can wear it for a long period of time to measure your movement across multiple days. Some of the other measures that we use are more biological measures. So we measure the body temperature, which changes across the course of the day, and also the secretion of various different hormones. So one of the most important hormones for the body clock is melatonin. Melatonin is typically produced in a healthy functioning body clock a couple of hours before you would normally go to bed. It rises to a peak during the night and then tapers off before you wake up in the morning. There are other hormones that are more related to awakeness and alertness, so things like cortisol. Cortisol reaches its peak shortly after you wake up and is higher throughout the day and lower throughout the night. And then core body temperature is at its lowest during the night and its highest during the day. So melatonin you might have heard of as the darkness hormone. So it's basically sending a signal to our body that it's dark, and for us, it's time to go to sleep. These different rhythms, so we've got different hormones being secreted, we've got our core body temperature and other biological processes. It's a very delicate balance of all these different things at different times of day and what level they're at to send signals around the body so that the body knows what time of day it is and to signal what time of day different processes happen. These rhythms begin to develop in infancy. So anyone with a newborn will tell you that in the beginning, they have no sense of night and day. They sleep and eat at completely chaotic times around the day. But hopefully, over the first 6 months or so, they start to develop a clearer pattern of night and day, when they're sleeping, when they're eating. And alongside that, these biological rhythms develop as well. So in this one that's at the top is the infants, where they might have a nap during the day in the grey, but then they've got a longer sleep period at night. And they've got this core body temperature in the red, which goes down during the night and then up during the day. They've got the blue melatonin, which goes up before they go to sleep and comes back down. And then the cortisol that comes up after awakening and goes back down. These develop across childhood and into adolescence and adulthood. And adolescence is actually a period of significant change in these circadian rhythms. So one of the main changes that we see in adolescence is a delay in the timing of when they go to sleep and when they wake up. We also see a delay in these biological rhythms as well. So the timing of when that melatonin comes on and the timing of when that body temperature drops are later in these people as well. So there might be a bit of a stereotype of lazy teenagers not wanting to get up in the morning, but actually we do believe that part of that is their biological clock driving them to go to bed later and to wake up later. And it's not just a behavioural thing of them choosing to stay in bed. Then into adulthood, we see the opposite. So we shift slightly back towards earlier bedtimes and earlier wake times. We also see a shortening of the sleep period. So as you get older, you tend to sleep less hours per night. And then through adulthood and into older ages, we also see these rhythms start to dampen down a bit. So they're not as strong as they were. You can see at the bottom that the lines are a bit flatter there's not as strong a signal for the circadian rhythms. So now to consider some situations in which the body clock might be disrupted or might not be functioning at its best. An obvious one of these is jet lag. So just like those bees that have gone on their holiday, if we travel over time zones, we are putting ourselves and our body clock in an environment that it is not adapted to. And then we find when we get there that it's difficult to sleep and wake when we want to be. We might feel hungry at the wrong times of day. And it does take a little while for us to get back on track and for those rhythms to kick back in and get back in line with the environment that we're in. Daylight savings, very similarly. It's a smaller shift, but it's the same thing, that we do have to adjust our schedules slightly and our bodies do have to take a little bit of time to adjust to that. In shift work, we are often expecting people to be awake and perform sometimes quite complex cognitive or physical tasks at a time of day when their body is telling them it's time to be asleep. And then we're telling them catch up on sleep at a time of day when their body clock is telling them it's time to be awake. So that can be really very disruptive to the body clock. Then there's light exposure. So light is, as we know, is the most important signal to our body clock about what time of day it is. If we're getting light at irregular times of day, that can be very disruptive to the body clock. In particular, if we get a lot of light in the evening, that can shift our body clock later. So then we want to sleep later, we want to wake up later. And conversely, if we get a lot of light in the morning, that can shift our body clock earlier and make us want to wake up earlier and make us want to go to sleep earlier. This can be a really big problem in our society because we do have this access to artificial lighting at all times of day, sometimes quite bright lighting, and sometimes we are giving our body clock these light signals at a time of day when they don't expect them and they don't really know what to do with it. Having irregular sleep-wake patterns can also be quite disruptive to the body clock. So the time when you sleep and when you're awake does influence the body clock in the same way that the body clock influences the sleep. It's a bit of a cycle. And then there's abnormal functioning of the body clock itself. So the body clock itself might not be functioning optimally, and that might cause problems in our sleep and wake and other processes. So my particular area of research is looking at the role of the body clock in mood disorders. So mood disorders are quite common conditions. It's estimated that between 1 in 4 and 1 in 5 people will experience a mood disorder or a mental illness at some point in their lifetime. They are often chronic conditions, so people who have experienced one episode will likely go on to experience another episode, and then the more that you've had, the more that you're likely to continue having episodes of these. And when I talk about mood disorders, I'm talking about a bit of a broad range of conditions that might come under the labels of such things as major depression, bipolar disorder, anxiety disorders, or even psychotic disorders. So sometimes in research, these are considered to be quite distinct disorders with specific sets of symptoms. However, actually, when you break them down a bit and look at them a bit closer, you find that the symptoms for one disorder actually appear in the other disorder as well, that a person who meets the criteria for one disorder will likely have another diagnosis too, that a lot of the risk factors are the same, and there's really not that much evidence that they are specifically distinct things in the way that we have been defining them in research. So in our research, we look broadly across all of these disorders to look at what is the body clock doing across the range of mood disorders. So some of the things that those with mood disorders might experience includes depressive episodes. A depressive episode might include such symptoms as a low mood or feeling sad a lot of the time, a loss of interest in activities, difficulty concentrating on making decisions, thoughts of death or suicide, changes in appetite or weight, and sleep disturbances. Those with more of a bipolar type disorder might also experience episodes of what we call mania or hypomania. These include periods of increased energy and increased activity, quick thinking and racing thoughts, a low need for sleep, impulsivity and poor decision-making, and then risk-taking behaviour. Episodes of anxiety and anxiety disorders might include such things as excessive worry, irritability, panic attacks, disturbances in sleep, and physical symptoms as well. And then there are psychotic episodes, which might include such things as hallucinations and delusions, disorganized thinking, social withdrawal, and reduced emotional expression. So all of these disorders have quite a big impact on people's lives. So they cause significant distress to the person and to those close to them. They might result in suicidal thoughts or behaviors. They can affect a person's thinking and their ability to maintain social relationships, their ability to be a productive member of the workforce, and they cost quite a lot in terms of treatment and care. So over the years, several different treatments have been developed for mood disorders. These include things such as therapy or counselling. There are various different behavioural strategies. And then there are a range of different medications that work on different systems and in different ways. Some of these therapies can be very effective and treat these disorders quite well. However, it can be very difficult to predict which treatment is going to be right for which individual. So often doctors are just making their best guess about what medication or other therapy is going to be relevant to the person in front of them. And then it's a process of trial and error to try and find out what is actually going to work for that individual. So one of the reasons why it's so difficult for us to predict who is going to respond best to which treatment is that we just don't know enough about what the underlying causes of these disorders are and how those work and how best to treat the causes themselves. So in our research, we think that the body clock is a cause of mood disorders in some people. And so that's one thing that we want to target when looking at these treatments. So it's really important that research like ours is trying to help us understand what is actually happening in the brain and body in these disorders and in different people, and then we can see how better to treat it. So you'll notice when I was speaking about the symptoms of mood disorders that I mentioned sleep as a symptom in pretty much all of the disorders. And a lot of the other symptoms are related to things like energy levels and activity levels as well. And as we know, sleep, energy, and activity, one system that has a big influence on these and controls them in some way is the body clock. So one of our main hypotheses is that the body clock is contributing to people developing these disorders or people continuing to have these disorders or not recovering from these disorders in some people. Excuse me. Another interesting thing to note about sleep in people with mood disorders is that it's not the same for different people. The kind of problems that people experience are not the same from one individual to the next. For example, one person might experience a lot of disruption in their sleep. They might find it difficult to fall asleep at night. They might wake up a lot overnight and they might have less sleep than they actually need. Whereas another person might find that they actually sleep too much. They sleep for a very long time at night. They find it difficult to be awake when they need to. And so one of the big questions for us is to ask, what's happening with the body clock in those different people? And then what can we do to fix that? So we are particularly focused on adolescents and young adults in our research. One of the reasons for this is, as I mentioned earlier, the body clock undergoes a big period of development in adolescence. It undergoes a lot of change. And we think that this is a time when it can be particularly vulnerable to develop problems. At the same time, a lot of mood disorders have their first onset in adolescence and young adulthood. It's about 75% of mood disorders will have their first episode before the age of 25. So this is the age group that we are focusing on in our research, because this is the age group where both of those things are very vulnerable. When we look at these people, these young people with these mood disorders, one of the common body clock disturbances that we see is a delayed sleep and wake phase. So this means that they're going to bed late, they're going to sleep late, and they're also waking up late the next morning. In this group of people, we have also found that their melatonin rhythm, the onset of melatonin when it starts being produced in the evening, is later, and their core body temperature reaches its lowest point later in the night. So that's shown in this graph. The top is just normal people who do not have any mood disorders. The second bar is looking at those who have this delay. So they've got later sleep and wake in the black, and then the red is showing their melatonin, which is also later, and the green is showing their body temperature, which is also later. So it looks like it's not just a behavioral thing of going to sleep later and waking up later, but it's also associated with a delayed body clock in these people. There are then two other groups of people that we have found. The next one has quite disrupted sleep. So they have the timing of their sleep and when they wake up, and the timing of those biological measures, the melatonin and the temperature, is very similar to those without depression. However, they report a lot of disruptions in sleep. They wake up a lot throughout the night. And then there's a final group of people who, again, have quite similar timing to those without depression in their biological rhythms and in the time they go to bed, but they wake up a lot later in the morning, and as a result have quite a long period of sleep. And this is often associated with more of a psychotic type disorder. So in addition to those delays that we see in some people, so that later sleep timing and those later rhythms, some research has also shown reduced strength of circadian rhythms in those with mood disorders. This is particularly seen in those with a bipolar type mood disorder. So this graph here is showing in the grey those with a major depressive disorder in the light grey, and then those with a bipolar disorder in the dark grey. And this is showing their melatonin that is produced in the evening. So for those with the bipolar disorder, not only is the melatonin starting to be produced later in the evening, but it also doesn't reach as high of a peak. So they don't have as strong a signal to coordinate everything that they're doing within the body clock. Another thing that we see in mood disorders is irregularity of timing. So it's not just about going to bed late, it's about going to bed at a different time from day to day across a longer period of time, and not keeping a regular schedule, and not just of sleep, but also things like meal timing, social activities, work schedules, and just having a bit more of a less regular schedule from day to day. Some research has also shown them having less robust rhythms, so less of a clear 24-hour signal that repeats itself from day to day. And then also a lower amplitude of various different rhythms. So the lower amplitude is really just that flattened curve. Like I showed in the last slide, their melatonin doesn't reach as high. In this slide here, we are looking at their activity levels, so how much they move throughout the night and throughout the day. In the red, we have those without depression, so they reach quite a high level during the day of their activity. But in the blue and the green, we've got those who have a current depression episode or those who have had depression in the past. And in both of those groups, they have a much lower level of activity during the day. And as a result of this, the curve of their activity is flattened. Some more evidence that we have that there is a relationship between the body clock and mood disorders is that there are several situations in which the body clock is disrupted, where we also see disruptions in mood. So the first one of these is shift work. In shift workers, we see increased depressive symptoms, and they're also more likely to have a mood disorder. In jet lag, so when we travel across time zones, our mood can get quite disrupted as well, alongside those sleep and eating and other cycles. In sleep deprivation, so if you force people to stay awake longer than they need to be awake, that has quite profound impact on their mood and can really affect that. And then seasonal changes as well. So there's actually a disorder called seasonal affective disorder, which is a mood disorder where the depressive episodes occur at certain times of year, most commonly in the winter. So in the winter, there is less daylight. People may be less inclined to go outside and spend time in natural light. And at this time, we see an increase in these mood episodes. As we know, light is a really big signal for the body clock. So these seasonal changes are having an effect on that, and that's when the mood episodes occur. One of the really big questions that we are asking in our research is what is driving what? A bit of a sort of chicken and the egg argument. So is the mood disruption coming first, or is the body clock disruption coming first? And if we want to answer these kinds of questions, what we need to do is to measure their mood and measure their sleep and their body clock over extended periods of time to see what happens to them both. There are a number of different developments in technology that have been really helpful in allowing us to do this. One of these is actigraphy watches. So I mentioned these briefly earlier. It's a device like a Fitbit or another fitness type watch, but we have more sensitive ones that we use in our research. And it's basically just measuring movement. People can wear them for extended periods of time. And from that, we can get an estimate of when they were asleep, when they were awake, when they were active, how active they were, and then look at how that changes from day to day over multiple days or weeks or even months. Another technology is different mobile applications. So this might be an app on your phone that sends you a notification a couple of times a day and asks you to fill out a couple of questions about your mood or other symptoms that you might be experiencing. And when we use these, we can get information about what's happening to the person in the moment, rather than waiting until the end of the week or the end of a certain period of time and asking them, how did you feel this week? How did you feel across the course of the whole week? We're actually getting information at the time. So this is research from some colleagues of ours that has combined these two measures to try and tease apart what is the direction of these effects, what is affecting what. So what they did was they measured sleep, they measured activity, they measured energy levels, and they measured mood at multiple time points across the day. The orange arrows in this figure are showing significant associations. So when you look at the sleep from the night before, it does not have a significant association directly with mood. However, sleep does affect activity levels, and then activity levels affect both mood and energy. So with research like this, we can start to sort of tease apart what the direction of these effects are, what is driving what, and what happens first, and then to know what do we need to alter. Another really important aspect of research into how the body clock might be related to mood disorders is looking at light sensitivity. So light is such an important signal to our clock, but some recent research has found that how sensitive the clock is to light actually varies considerably between different individuals. So this is just a graph showing in the blue someone who has quite high light sensitivity. So it's just indicating how much their clock responds to a certain amount of light. And with this person, you can give them a small amount of light and their clock will have a really big response to it. The person in the red has a low sensitivity to light, so you can give them the same amount of light and it will do nothing to their clock. You need to give them actually quite a lot more light, quite a lot brighter light to make their clock have the same response that the person with high sensitivity had. So because this varies quite considerably between individuals, what this means for mood disorders is that this might affect the way that different people's clocks are responding to the environment. In mood disorders, and particularly in bipolar disorder, it's starting to come out that they may have a higher sensitivity to light. So these people may be quite vulnerable to changes in their environment or to receiving a lot of light that their clock doesn't expect, which will then make a big disruption in their clock and perhaps make them more susceptible to develop these mood disorders. There's also some research showing that some of the common antidepressants that are used may have an effect on light sensitivity. So if these antidepressants are increasing light sensitivity, that would be a good thing for someone with low sensitivity, but it might be a bad thing for someone with high sensitivity. So once this research gets a little bit further, we'll be able to use this information to say who would be the most appropriate person to give this medication to, given what their current light sensitivity is. And then there's some more mechanistic research, which is looking at how the light sensitivity actually works in terms of the pupil in the eye opening and closing to let light in, and how that relates to the body clock. So the body clock doesn't just control sleep and wake. We know that it also controls a whole lot of other processes in the brain and the body. And some of these are also disrupted in mood disorders. Some of the big ones are metabolic health and then immune and inflammatory dysfunction. So in terms of metabolic health, those with mood disorders are more likely to have a high BMI. They're more likely to have altered glucose metabolism, insulin resistance, and to develop diabetes. A lot of these metabolic health problems are also seen in situations in which the body clock is disrupted. So in shift workers, in those with quite short sleep, in those with sleep that is delayed. And then similarly, for inflammatory and immune response, there are a lot of disruptions that are seen both in mood disorders and in those with body clock disruption. So this is just some research of ours looking at the effect of BMI on our activity levels across the day and showing that is quite different in those without mood disorders and those with mood disorders. So in those with mood disorders, there is more of an effect of having an elevated BMI on reducing their activity across the whole day and not just within sort of an evening period when it is most relevant in controls. So from all these different pieces of evidence, we can start to get an idea of how the body clock and mood disorders might be related and get a bit of a picture of what a person who has a mood disorder that is underlined by body clock disruption might look like. So they might have delayed sleep, they might have quite disrupted sleep, they might have physical health problems, metabolic issues as well, alongside those mood and sleep and other body clock symptoms. So then we get to what is probably the most important part of what we do and why we do the research that we do. How can we use the information that we know about the body clock and mood disorders to improve outcomes for people? Firstly, we can do that in terms of treatments. So looking at what treatments we select, and if we have someone who does have a body clock disruption, what can we do to fix that? One of the therapies here is bright light therapy, which is quite commonly used in seasonal affective disorder, but can also be effective in some non-seasonal disorders as well. And basically this involves a light box or glasses that you wear that have bright light that get worn for a period of time every morning. And as we know, a lot of morning light can be a very strong signal to help reset the body clock and help to keep it on track. And that therapy can be quite effective in reducing mood symptoms in those people as well. There are also behavioral therapies. So these are commonly used in those with bipolar type disorders. And these just involve regulating the time of when you go to sleep, when you wake up, and when you do other activities and tasks throughout the day to try and keep it on a more regular schedule rather than a chaotic schedule. And that can help to keep the body clock on track as well. Then there are various different medications that we know have effects on the body clock. A key one of these is agomelatine, which is an antidepressant that affects melatonin levels as well. And we have shown in some of our research that when you give young people with depressive disorders a course of agomelatine for 6 weeks, those people who have the biggest reduction in their depressive symptoms also have the biggest shift in their body clock. So these people started off quite delayed and it shifted earlier over the course of their treatment. And those who had the biggest shift had the biggest reduction in their symptoms. So that's really good evidence for us that this medication works on the body clock and it corrects something that was wrong with the body clock. And that's related to them recovering from their mood episode. And then there are some novel therapies such as ketamine that are currently being researched, and there's some initial evidence from research into these to suggest that they may also have a role on the body clock, that might be part of the way in which they work. But that's research that is still being developed a lot at the moment, so it's in quite early stages. And then we have a bigger question of all medications and all therapies that we do, what effect do all of those have on the body clock? This isn't a question that has been really systematically asked and answered in depression, but if we can ask it and if we can get good answers to that, and if we can measure within people what their own body clock is doing, then we can get to a place where we give people a medication that's more likely to work for them. And then the other thing that we can do with this information is just to keep a healthier body clock in general. So if we all keep a healthier body clock and we're all more educated about what behaviors we can do, and we know what might be going wrong with the body clock, so we can pick things up early, then we're more likely to be able to prevent these disorders from happening in the first place. So I'm just going to finish up now with some of our top tips for keeping a healthy body clock, and then we can open to some questions. So firstly, keeping consistent bedtimes and wake up times. They don't need to be exactly to the minute every day, but varying too much from day to day can be quite a disruptive signal to the body clock. So it's important to try and keep a regular schedule as much as possible. This includes not oversleeping on weekends. So it can be quite common for people, especially people who prefer to go to bed later and wake up later, those so-called night owls, to sleep later on the weekend, wake up later on the weekend, and then their body clock is shifted later, and come Monday morning, they have to shift themselves back, which is much harder to shift backwards than it is to shift forwards. So trying to make sure that within reason, we try and keep that schedule across weekends as well as weekdays. Getting lots of morning light. So we know light's a really important signal for the body clock. So getting outdoors if you can in the morning and trying to get a nice consistent light signal every morning. And then at the other end, trying to stay away from bright lighting and off devices as much as possible before bed, so that the body clock's not getting confused by those light signals in the evening. And finally, physical activity. So keeping up physical activity during the daytime is a great signal to the body clock, and it's also great for us to be healthy in many other ways. So a healthy body clock and a healthy sleep-wake cycle will have quite regular sleep and wake times, lots of light, lots of activity in the morning, and less light, less activity in the evening to help us wind down before bed. And that will help to keep a consistent 24-hour rhythm and a healthy body clock. These are just a few of our researchers at the Brain and Mind Centre. I couldn't name everyone, it would take hours, but just to say a big thank you to everyone who works on this research and everyone who has contributed to it, and in particular to all the young people with mood disorders who come through and do the research and participate in the research. It's a big thing to do, and it's a really important thing. We're really grateful to them for that. And thank you for listening, and any questions?
Online. How does this affect people who
I haven't seen any research specifically looking at those locations where they do have quite extreme light patterns. I think that we're getting quite good at, here in our society, the artificial lighting can be a big problem, but the fact that we can have artificial light at those times of year when they might have darkness for most of the day can be really helpful to them. I haven't seen specifically whether there is a higher incidence of mood disorders or decreased incidence of mood disorders in those situations, but that would be a really interesting question.
So the rats with the damaged SVM,
I believe they did have a shortened lifespan. I'm not sure if they had mood disorders. It's a bit difficult to measure a rat's mood. But yeah, I haven't seen specifically any research around whether they exhibited symptoms that might indicate those sort of mood disorders. It's more about the fact that the body clock being disrupted was disruptive on the activity cycles and the eating patterns. Yeah. It's an interesting question though. Yeah.
Okay, so I've got a couple of questions here from online. I've got someone asking, I'm 69, but think I have an adolescent body clock that is staying up late, getting up late. Is this possible? Also, lots of inflammation and body aches and pains.
Yeah, so there's a thing called chronotype, which we would commonly refer to people as either night owls or morning larks. And that's very much an individual thing, regardless of age. So yes, these adolescents do run on a later schedule. And during that period of life, they are later than they will be at other periods. But also within individuals, we definitely do have people that run or have preferences for later schedules versus earlier schedules. And in some cases, that can actually become a disorder. There's a disorder called delayed sleep-wake phase disorder, where your clock naturally runs on a very late time, and you find it very difficult to engage in work and employment because your body clock is driving you to go to bed later and wake up later, and that is more common in people with mood disorders as well.
Let's go another one here. How many hours before bed do we need to be off devices and have lower activity levels?
So look, there's no sort of magic number of how long. We would recommend at least an hour would be great to have less activity, less light, especially on devices. But any amount of time is good. And if you imagine us living in a world where we didn't have electric lighting, then we would expect for the light to be lower from sundown, which is typically quite a long time before we go to bed. So even if we're not completely off our devices or doing other things, just having the lamps on rather than having the overhead light and reducing that light a bit can still be very beneficial in that manner.
How do you spoke about the high sensitivity people and the low sensitivity people in terms of light. Could you talk more about that and sort of how do you know who you are in that regard?
Sure. So the way that it's being measured in the lab at the moment is looking at how much your melatonin levels would normally rise in the evening. And then if we put you in a situation where there's a lot of bright light, how much do they rise? So typically if someone's melatonin is going up and you give them bright light, their melatonin comes back down. It stops being produced by the body. So the question in the lab is how much does the melatonin reduce as a result of how much light you're giving them, which is quite a difficult thing to know for us as individuals because it does involve, going and doing a sleep study overnight. But we're starting to get some research now that's looking at the pupils and how much the pupils open and close in response to light. And whether that is related to light sensitivity, which will be a much easier measure for us to do in people on a broader scale. Yeah.
I'd read previously, before the Industrial Revolution, we used to have more of a broken sleep cycle. So you would work in the mornings, have a rest in the afternoon, I guess, do the home duties and whatever, and then sleep again. Is there any evidence that that's natural, or is that just something that we chose to do?
Not that I've seen. Generally, we think of naps as not being a very good thing because if you nap during the day, you're less likely to be tired at bedtime, which then throws your bedtime later and disrupts the sleep-wake cycle in general. I'm not familiar with any research that does look at whether a sleep cycle like that might still be natural if it's kept up over the long term. Certainly in children we see it, but typically as we get older we don't in that slightly anyway. Yeah.
What about, so I've had a stroke with brain injuries, and when you said about my autonomic system is crap. So my temperature fluctuations doesn't work. So sometimes I get I get that cold at night, but I get it during the day. So and the other one is trying to work out whether I'm tired or whether it's fatigue. Is there any?
Yeah, the tiredness versus fatigue is a difficult question to tease apart, especially in mental illness where I'm looking as well, where there is a lot of fatigue that isn't necessarily related to not getting enough sleep. It's just related to their mood and how they're feeling overall. In terms of the other question, were you saying that you feel like your body temperature is not running on a
It put me on
melatonin? Yeah. Yeah, so that would indicate to me that something about the body clock has been damaged and isn't working properly. So melatonin is one of the key signals that the body clock produces. And in people who do have a body clock that isn't functioning properly for that reason or another reason, giving them melatonin artificially can create that signal in the body, which then can obviously help a lot to help you to stay asleep.
A couple more questions online. How does menopause impact sleep?
So it's an interesting question. So sleep and circadian rhythms do vary across the course of the menstrual cycle as well. So then disruptions to that and changes in that in menopause can affect sleep. And I haven't, because my area is more in young people, I haven't really got a lot of familiarity with what actually happens in menopause in terms of the body clock. But I would imagine that there are significant effects on it. Yeah, so I can't comment more specifically.
Right. Yeah. Which one do we address first, the sleep cycle or the mood disorder first?
So for us, we believe that the sleep-wake cycle is part of what is causing the mood disorder. So in that respect, we need to address that in order for the mood to improve. This doesn't mean that you don't do other things as well that may also be effective. And I don't think it really has to be one or the other.
Right. And one more here. Does the function of mitochondria change when the circadian rhythm is altered?
So I don't have any experience in the basic science of that. So I'm sorry, I don't really have an answer to that one.
Two issues. Your recommendation to not have naps contradicts a very famous cultural phenomenon of siesta. Secondly, when you say you measure melatonin, is that a component of blood? Do you do blood tests and analyze blood?
Yes. So melatonin can be measured in blood or in saliva. So we have done both in our laboratory. And yes, there was another question about the siesta and having that sort of 2 periods of sleep during the day. I'm not familiar with anything specifically, any research specifically looking at whether that is or isn't beneficial or natural in terms of mood disorders.
Yeah. Why does sundowning happen in dementia sufferers?
Sorry?
I hope I'm reading this question right. Why does sundowning happen in dementia sufferers? Does it make sense?
Yeah, that's a great question. Look, I don't have a lot of experience. As I say, my expertise is in young people, so I don't have a lot of experience in what happens in dementia and in those conditions that typically occur in older age. But I would not be at all surprised if it is related to the body clock. I can tell you that much.
Made a comment about siesta, but it tends to be in countries that are very hot, and it's to give people a rest from the midday sun so that you don't tax other parts of the body. So by just staying out in the sun and that's what that's sleep, you can go a flower field or do whatever without overfishing.
Yeah, so it can be very much a cultural thing, and there's obviously different reasons for that in different parts of the world. Yeah.
Any other questions? Anyone else with a question? Yeah.
And this last one here, is it possible to retrain night owls?
That's a great question. To some extent, yes. So I have small children, and my small children, I'm a night owl, but my small children have retrained me to wake up earlier and go to bed earlier. But I think it is a struggle. It is more difficult for those people to maintain an earlier schedule than it is for those who are naturally morning larks. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, great. Thanks very much, everyone, for attending. Yeah.
Thank you, folks. Feel free to log into this survey link that's up on your screen. That takes you to the Culture Counts questions, where you can enter all your feedback about both the topic, the content, the speakers, and also anything else about today's talk you'd like to give. Thank you.